Thank you. We've got about 20 people here, maybe 30. And out in Zoom land, 35. And I expect more. But we're going to get right into this. AgnesTrouilete is Associate Professor of American Studies at University Paris Nanterre, specialized in political history and the history of cartography. Her research interest is European and indigenous clashing conceptions and practices of territory in the mid-Atlantic colonies, as expressed in their settlement design in shifting sovereignties in the Delaware Valley. She has published in the Transactions of the American Philosophical Society on the boundary dispute between Pennsylvania and Maryland, and in French journals on colonial mapping, used as strategy and instrument to erase native populations. She is co-editing a special issue of Indigenous counter cartographies in the Americas to be published in the IDEA, IDE capital AS journal in October of 2025. I met Agnes. She had done a presentation a couple of years ago, a Zoom presentation at the Free Library of Philadelphia, and on the Holmes map. And I found that to be fascinating, to find somebody else interested in Holmes map. And so I got in touch with Agnes, and she responded right away. She was in Paris. I guess you were in Paris at that time, but maybe she was in Philly. But she has been in Philadelphia many times, and the last couple of summers I've had the honor and the pleasure of visiting with her and discussing more about Holmes map and 17th century cartography and the indigenous people that is represented or not represented on those maps, and just the indigenous people in general. So I'm going to hand it over to Agnes. Are you there, Agnes?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Great. We can certainly hear you.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
So shall I start?
You can go right ahead and start. It's 1 o'clock over there, folks. So
yeah,
it's not 1 o'clock here. Go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Fred, for this lengthy introduction. And I wanted to thank you and the Northeast Philadelphia History Network for inviting me to talk tonight. I'm very glad to be part of the cycle of the presentations that Fred told me about and dealing with your region. And I was not able to connect when Fred presented on the Northeast Philadelphia on maps, nor when Jim Shumper presented extremely rich material also on Surveyor General Thomas Holm. But I checked those presentations on your YouTube channel, so it's wonderful. And so we do share a common interest and even a passion for maps with Fred, and I'm very honored to be speaking at an event of your organization, especially from across the Atlantic. So forgive me if I'm a bit tired sometimes, because it's a bit late now, but I'm gonna try to keep you interested. So the presentation, as you see on the title here, deals with colonial maps of the Delaware River and how they actually convey indigenous presence, whether in textual descriptions, toponyms, ethnonyms, or cultural features. For historians of the region and people who are real cartographers or experts in cartography, I hope to interest you in talking about topics and places that you already know so much about. So the Delaware, if there are people in the audience who are not from the area, is a major river in the mid-Atlantic, taking its source in upper state New York and emptying in the Delaware Bay. And long before Penn, so I'm gonna maybe use this. Can you still see the screen all right? Okay. So long before William Penn started his Quaker colony, thank you, the Delaware Valley was rich with exchanges between the Lenape, the original inhabitants of the region, and the Dutch, Swedes, and English who had occupied the region for more than 2 generations, vying for control of the lucrative fur trade and of the Delaware River. The Lenape-Weehituck, the river of the Lenape people, or the largest river in the region in the language. So the Lenape, called Delaware Indians by the Europeans, are Algonquian populations that originally stretched from the south of present-day state of New York to New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, and from the Atlantic Ocean to the western bank of the Delaware River. As seminal studies by regional historians, Dan Richter, Gene Sutherland, and Mark Thompson notably have demonstrated the Lenape were able to maintain their political and territorial sovereignty in the region well into the 18th century. They welcomed European settlers as source of trade goods, but also to increase leverage in their own relations with other indigenous populations of the Northeast, especially the powerful Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois. And they played European powers against each other in the vast nexus of trade and used their strategic position on the Delaware River that also operated as a crossroads between the northern and southern colonies. So maps particularly became a colonization strategy from the 17th century by implementing linear boundaries between different territories where centralized authorities now prevailed, as Stuart Eldon explains in The Birth of Territory. Maps now not only represented the world along geometrical references, they also started to define its visual representation as the forms of authority that ceased to be represented progressively disappeared from settlers' and investors' imagination, as Jordan Branch states in the Cartography states. 17th and 18th century cartographic representations thus progressively evacuated the indigenous presence by literally erasing them from the map. Revisiting these maps allows to reinstate the indigenous entities that have been discarded and shift the perspective as prompted by historians who focus on the indigenous agentivity in the encounter with the Europeans. My work also builds on studies by historians of cartography and the examination of questions in which land, territory, and property intersect. The maps we are going to see, however, convey indigenous presence through, as I said, either toponyms, ethnonyms, or cultural features, and predate the English maps of the region of the late 17th century that relied on property survey and meant to delineate the land accordingly. The earlier Dutch, Swedish, and English maps translate strong indigenous presence. They also tell the story of indigenous resistance to large-scale exploitation of the region's rich potential and help restore indigenous centrality in the history of the region. So this pen and ink and watercolor map from around 1639 that Fred showed you already is by Johan Vinkeboens, a Dutch surveyor, cartographer, and engraver employed by the Dutch West India Company who for more than 30 years produced maps for use by Dutch mercantile and military shipping. A business partner of Johan Blauw, one of the most important map and atlas publishers of the day, Vinkeboens drew a series of 200 manuscript maps that were used in the production of atlases, including Blauw's Atlas Major. So this map is oriented with the north to the right, as is common on maps of that period. It shows the Godin's Bay, the Dutch name for the Delaware Bay, and the Zwit or South River, the Dutch name for the Delaware River, As you know, the North River was the Hudson River, right? And the South, the Delaware. It shows the adjoining coasts, and when the region was part of the colony of New Netherland, okay? So I'm showing a contemporary map of New Netherland here. So for people who might need to know a little bit more. So New Netherland was established by the Dutch in 1621 and ruled by them until it was seized by the British in 1664. To ensure possession of the South River, the Delaware River, and to control the trade with the Minkus Susquehannock Indians who came from the Susquehanna River in the west, the Dutch West India Company built Fort Nassau on the east side of the river, opposite present-day Philadelphia. The Susquehanna brought their furs to trade from the richly beaver-populated Susquehanna Valley. And the Dutch then sent the furs to New Amsterdam, from where they exported them to Europe. The Vinkbunds map is one of the first representations of the Delaware River. Again, Fred showed you the very first from 1616 last time. So the date of this map is uncertain, but it must be later than 1631, as we're going to see. It shows geographical features with water depths and in soundings. And interestingly, shows indigenous presence using ethnonyms like the Sikonese, the Naraticans, the Amewamis, the Sankikan, for example. And also indigenous cultural features. You can make out the different plantations, notably the numerous longhouses at various locations on the east bank of the river. There is a long description of the different indigenous populations on the left side of the map, of which I intend to provide more information soon. I hope to have this information for tonight, but unfortunately, this will have to wait another time. So, Swannendale, the Valley of the Swans in English, was the first attempt by the Dutch at establishing a permanent settlement in the region. The Dutch West India Company chose the west side of the Delaware on the bank of the Hoare Kill, to support a whale oil industry. However, the West India Company also planned to exploit the region's rich agricultural potential. On June the 1st, 1629, Peter Minuit, the director of the New Netherland colony, met with the Sikonese Indians to certify that they had sold the land for Swannendale along the southern shore of the Delaware Bay. And in the spring of 1631, 28 men were put ashore, 5 more would join them. And due to a series of misunderstandings with the Sikonese, however, all but 1 colonist were killed. And after the Swannendale tragedy, although the company continued trading with at Fort Nassau upstream on the river on the east bank to maintain its claim on the Delaware, no further attempt was made by the Dutch to colonize the region. Peter de Vries was the Swannendale patroon and commander of the ship the Walvis that brought the settlers in 1631, and he led the second expedition to the Delaware in 1632. Before sailing out in 1632, he recorded in his journal, we understood that our little fort at Swannendale had been destroyed by the Indians. The people killed 32 men who were outside the fort working the land. Arriving at Swannendale on December 6, it reads, coming by our house, which was destroyed, found lying here and there the skulls and bones of our people, whom they had killed, and the heads of the horses and cows which they had brought with them. So what happened at Swannendale? Why did the Sikonese, the southernmost Lenape inhabiting the region, react so violently? Well, the Lenape quickly reacted in order to prevent further plantation attempts, efficiently dictating their future relationships with the Dutch. The first reason was, as maybe some of you know, a coat of arms. De Vries records the explanations given by a Sikonese Indian. He showed us the place where our people had set up a column, to which was fastened a piece of tin whereon the arms of Holland were painted. One of their chiefs took this off for a purpose of making tobacco pipes, not knowing what he was doing amiss. Those in command of the house made such an ado about it that the Indians, not knowing how it was, went away and slew the chief that who had done it. Then they brought a token of the dead to the house to those in command. The Dutch told them they should have brought him to them instead, to forbid him to do the like again. A specific exertion of justice by natives that Europeans never really understood. Subsequently, however, the friends of the murdered chief set about the work of vengeance. Now, why did they kill the Dutch while they were working the land? This was also something the Dutch could not fathom. Here is the account. Observing our people out of the house, each one at his work, that there was not more than one inside who was lying sick, and a large mastiff who was chained, and the man who had command standing in the house. 3 Indians brought beaver skins, and after the barter was done with the man in command inside the house, one of the Indians seized an axe and cleft his head so that he fell down dead. They killed the sick man, shot 25 arrows into the dog, then proceeded towards the rest of the men who were at their work and struck them down. The Sikonese, in fact, quickly grasped that the Dutch were attempting to plant a large-scale agricultural colony, not just a trading post. De Vries, in about the 1631 settlement, indeed stated, they engaged in whaling and farming and made suitable fortifications so that in July of the same year, their cows calved and their land seeded and covered with a fine crop. The first expedition indeed had brought a large stock of cattle on the ship, cattle that devastated Indian plantations, eating their crops and scavenging their food stores. Had the Dutch contented themselves with the trading, this would never have happened. Now Europeans knew who was in command. No wonder that the crew during the second expedition was constantly on their guard when they made Sikonese, Amewamsi, Mantis, and Sankiken. Each time they submitted to their instructions. The native decided if and when they made peace. Also, the Dutch were outnumbered at the different meetings, and the sachems so they were afraid of them. The Dutch indeed had left a large ship at Swannendale on account of the invisible shoals that made the Delaware so dangerous to navigate, and left with just a 7-man crew on a yacht to sail up the river to Fort Nassau. And they were cautioned for a reason. For example, on their way to the fort, the Mantis Indians told them to haul into the Timber Kill, Big Timber Creek. And thanks to Sankiken women from the community that dwelled higher on the river at the falls, they learned that the Mantis intended to attack them and that they had just seized a shallop with Englishmen and killed them. In these episodes, as in Swannendale, we see occurrences of what Jean Sutherland calls a small-scale violence, to which the otherwise peaceful Lenape nations did not resort, yet the goal was to demonstrate their sovereignty. The Swannendale toponym is very conspicuous on the map. Its size is a tribute to the first Dutch attempt at settlement, but mostly testifies to the tragedy that thwarted any further initiative at controlling the Lenape and settling permanently along conditions that did not comply to them. With them, sorry. As we saw, Peter Minuit had extensive experience not only of the Hudson Valley, but also of the Delaware Valley. He knew its rich potential, and several years after he was discharged from the West India Company service in 1631, he was hired by Sweden to lead an expedition to the Delaware with the objective of forming a trading colony. New Sweden was thus the first permanent European settlement on the Delaware. And this is a contemporary map of the short-lived colony of New Sweden, 1638, 1655. You see the extent in blue. So this is the map of the Delaware River made by Swedish engineer Peter Lindström in 1654-55. It depicts the Delaware River that the Swedes called the New Sweden River to distinguish it from the Dutch South River. Lindström's map has the north to the right and shows the Delaware River from the Delaware Bay with Cape Henlopen on the west bank and Cape May on the east bank up to the falls of the Delaware River near present-day Trenton. Lindström's manuscript map was brought to Sweden. It burned in a fire, but fortunately a copy had been made, and this copy is in the Swedish archives. The map here is a copy included in a history of New Sweden by Swedish Lutheran missionary Israel Acrelius that was published in 1759. But I will be using this digitized version of the map. It's easier to read. It comes from the Swedish settlements on the Delaware, published by historian Amandus Johnson, 1925. So, or maybe a little later. So, the Swedes entered the Delaware Bay early March 1638 and proceeded up the river above the Horkill stream, the location of Swannendale. At Minuit, targeted a specific site, the Minkeskill, the river of the Minkas Susquehanna, who used this convenient route to bring their furs to trade from the Susquehanna Valley. The commercial importance of this site was also the deep waters where large ships could be anchored. Besides, Minuit knew very well that the region was not occupied by Europeans, the condition that was imposed by the New Sweden Company to purchase land from the natives. Another crucial reason was the position of Dutch Fort Nassau, further up on the east bank of the Delaware. By selecting a site down the river, Minuit could establish Swedish ownership and erect a fort before the Dutch even knew that there were Swedes in what they considered their South River. On March 29th of 1638, 5 sachems boarded the ship anchored at the Minkeskill for a conference with Minuit, who requested that they sell the river and all the lands around it. Matterhorn, Metasemint, Elupakin, Mahaman, and Chiton granted Minuit all of the requested territory, declaring that they had transported, ceded, and transferred the said land with all its jurisdiction, sovereignty, and rights to the New Sweden Company. The purchase extended from the Schuylkill River that you see here to Bombjes Hook, Bombay's Hook, which is somewhere around here, if I'm not mistaken. The Swedes immediately built Fort Christina, named in honor of the Swedish monarch, at the site of present-day Wilmington, very famously the home of President Biden. The New Sweden colony faced competition from New Netherland, but the trading post they established on the west side of the river allowed them to neutralize Fort Nassau and to dominate the trade with the Susquehannock. In 1647, however, New Netherlands' new director Petrus Stuyvesant built another fort south of Fort Christina, challenging the Swedish domination of the fur trade, but also ensuring control of the river for the Dutch. New Sweden also struggled because the mother country for several years sent no ship to their colony. and settlers lacked resources and also goods to satisfy their native hosts. In the spring of 1644, to show the Swedes they were indeed expecting large amounts of trade goods, the NEPHN killed 5 Swedish settlers and soldiers. Another demonstration of who was in command. Another example is when Sachem Matterhorn, in council with other Sachems, reflected whether they should kill all the Swedes and destroy them all together, because they had many fortresses and houses for their habitation but had no goods to sell. The council weighed the facts that the Swedes were in friendship with them and that they would soon bring a large ship with all sorts of good things, and eventually decided them to not root them out of the country and love the Swedes always. Lindström arrived on May 23rd, 1654, 1 year before the Swedes would surrender to the Dutch. In 1654, however, the Swedes were still hopeful to exploit the potential of the colony. And Lindström was sent to explore the Delaware River for its navigation and plantation potential, painstakingly visiting every Delaware tributary, as you can see on this map. He was neither a surveyor nor a cartographer. He was by himself, rather young, inexperienced, and had unsophisticated instruments at his disposal. Yet he produced this remarkable map, even including, as you can see, an index at the bottom with entries from A to Z and from numbers 1 to 27, which is a lot of entries corresponding to the numerous elements for which he lacked space on the main section of the map. You can make, for example, Paradise Point, the first Swedish settlement. You can make out Trafalgargate, this is B, the fort that was taken from the Dutch, which was called Fort Casimir before, and which then became New Amstel when the Swedes surrendered to the Dutch in 1655. And then Newcastle when the English conquered the region in 1664. D is, Christina in the middle here, the fort, the most important Swedish settlement on the site of present-day Wilmington. And you see at U the location for Upland, where the first court of justice in the region was erected, and the site that was initially spotted for the settlement of Philadelphia. But due to the narrowness and shallowness of the river at that location, the area that was chosen instead by Penn's commissioners was around Passaic, which is on the next portion of the map. And the X is for Tennaconk or Tinicum, where Governor Prince erected his residence, Princehof. Lindström left another precious source, Geographia America, a journal published in 1691 from the notes he had taken while in the colony. In the English translation that was published in 1925 by Amandus Johnson, we discovered the detailed elements relating to the topography, the streams, the villages, the plantations, which offer an invaluable source on the region at the time. Lindström marveled at the variety of grains, trees, fruits, herbs, roots, at the abundance of animals, birds, and fishes. The journal also helps to apprehend the indigenous prevalence in the region. Lindström devoted 19 out of the 28 chapters of Geographia to the description of indigenous populations, their practices, and notably their uses of the land. Lindström, for example, mentions talking about the Sikonese who dwelt on the southern part of the river, that it was a powerful nation that was rich in maize plantations, so in corn. He observed that also the Lenape grew various species of corn, white, red, blue, flesh-colored, brown, yellow, and spotted ears on a large scale, that stalks grew so high that they reached an L above a man's head, and that each stalk had 6 or 7 ears. He identified 6 Lenape towns from Wikako to the falls of the Schuylkill at Nitabakonk. So you see Nitabakonk at the top left here, at the falls of the Schuylkill, and described the Delaware tributary, the main Delaware tributary that the Schuylkill is, as occupied in greatest force by Lenape groups that numbered in the several hundreds, and who had their dwellings side by side one another and had cleared and cultivated their land with great power. Interestingly, Lindström kept numerous indigenous toponyms on his map: Radicans, Pescosokas, Awamis, Nitabakonk, Passayunk, Wikakoing, Kakamenzi. So toponyms that were also ethnonyms in some cases. So these names are actually what Amandus Johnson called Indian geographical names, and for which he provided in his translation of Geographia an appendix. And Johnson stressed that the natives never gave an arbitrary name to a place, and that native names either referred to certain topographical or natural characteristics, or to the presence, usually in abundance, of certain animals, plants, or to the proximity, position, or presence of another place or of a person, sect, or race. Johnson compiled these toponyms from all the sources he had at his disposal at the time, notably the dictionary established by a Moravian missionary, John Ecker Welder, who spent decades living among the Lenape in the 18th century. The meaning of certain words is uncertain due to distortions happening when translating the words by Dutch people or Swedish or English or German people with a different phonetical system, yet they help retrieve important information. And some, of course, may be familiar to people who live or study the greater Philadelphia area. So, for example, Manayank means the place where we drink. Genshowane, I'm sorry for my accent, from Genshowan to roar, to make a great noise. Hana, river or creek, so the roaring river. Pasayank, are or at or in the valley or in a low place, etc. Wikako, at the pine tree camp or house, or the place where something ends. And a Sinpink, which is the place of the falls of the Delaware, around the falls of the Delaware, means at the water on the rocks, or the waterfall at the rocks. Lindström also recorded cultural features, such as how the Lenape used canoes made in hollowed out trunks, like was the practice in Sweden, actually. And that with the canoes, they could get from Senkikens to the Fall of Sinpink. They could go wherever they please in the shallow part of the river, as above the falls, for example. And this testifies to the role of indigenous knowledge and practices, of course, and to the different ways of seeing the landscape and waterways, which, of course, had consequences on their use of the land. Last but not least, Lindström identified several Indian paths on his map. And here you see, for example, the Manhattan path, Manhattan's Vegar, clearly visible. A path that is also visible on a later very famous map of the region, the Augustine Hermann map of the region. So This is an important map that I need to show you because it's the standard of the time for the region. And it was published in 1673, but compiled by 1670. And if Lindström focused more on the west bank of the Delaware, since this is where the Swedes first settled, most evidently the huge area on the eastern bank of the river corresponding to New Jersey Parse, is depicted on the Herman's map as at present inhabited only almost by Indians. The focus of the map that Jean Sutherland used for her seminal book, for the cover of the book Lenape Country, Delaware Valley Society before William Penn. I want to focus on the east bank now of the river. So let's move forward to the 1670s, when the English have conquered New Netherland and now possess the whole territory along the east coast from Virginia to New England. So this is okay, so the Herman map showed the larger region because it was actually made for Lord Baltimore to settle a dispute between Virginia and Maryland. But this is the first map of New Jersey. And it's from 1677. And the resolution is poor, but it allows you to see the composition of the map with the main section and a printed text in 4 columns at the bottom. I'm not going to explain all the cartouche and everything, but focus on elements that speak to our presentation tonight. Here again, the map has the north to the right. New Jersey, as you know, was granted in 1664 and held in joint ownership until 1674. And the tract of land between the Connecticut and the Delaware rivers was granted to Lord John Berkeley and Sir John Carteret, and it was called the New Caesarea, or New Jersey, in tribute to Carteret's loyalty in defending the Isle of Jersey during the English Civil War. Yet the colonies struggled to attract colonists, and the proprietors failed at imposing their authority, notably on Dutch and Swedes who had long settled in the region, which was emphasized during the brief reconquest of the region by the Dutch between August 1673 and February 1674. In 1675, Berkeley sold his half of the province of New Jersey to 2 Quakers, John Fenwick and Edward Billinge, or Billing, I'm not sure about the pronunciation. Yet bitter disputes emerged around misunderstandings about the rights that had been conveyed. The Society of France, which prohibited litigation between its members because it could damage the reputation of the society, appointed 4 trustees who settled the conflicts in July 1676 with the quintipartite deed, dividing, in effect, the territory into East New Jersey under the original grantee, Sir George Carteret, assigning him that part of the province next to New York that you see at the bottom, and West New Jersey under the Quaker interests, the part bordering on the Delaware as is visible on the map. The 4 trustees designated to oversee the dispute were led by William Penn, and it is under his leadership that they immediately started a plan to build a Quaker colony. It was actually Penn who commanded this map of New Jersey in America to attract potential settlers and investors. And this experience in dispute settlement and land promotion would be useful when he would start his own province, Pennsylvania, a few years later. The printed text notably presents the exceptional situation of New Jersey in terms of mobility and trade, as it is bounded with 2 navigable rivers visually. On the east side, the Hudson's River, on the west side, the Bay and River of Delaware. It describes the plantation potential of the colony, stressing the fertility of the land, the variety of animal and plant species, answering the promotional objective of the map. There are 4 states of the map of New Jersey. It's a complicated publication history. This is the fourth state from 1677, which saw major revisions since the first state from 1674, actually, 3 years earlier. Notably, the map has been enlarged to a width of 80 centimeters through the addition of a panel on the right. And you might see here the line of this extension, right? And the right-hand panel entirely contains an extension of the Delaware River, with a tributary of the river adding considerably north of the original one, connecting with the northward, with the northward extension of the Hudson River that you see at the bottom here. This improbable network of waterways translates how settlers expected to use the vast nexus of trade, but also their ignorance of the geography in spite of previous maps of the region. So I'm using the next map that you briefly saw. You see it without the extension. It's a little easier to read. It's interesting that the partition line is described, but it is not labeled. What we see is this is the partition line between east, and we of course missed the last part, but you see it here in a magnified version. And the names West New Jersey and East New Jersey are placed above and below the line, replacing the name New Jersey that appeared on previous maps. So the panel on the right has also been revised with numerous additions, chiefly decorative, of hills, animals, birds, and what interests us here, indigenous features. Most of these additions can be traced to the previous maps of the region, notably the famous, and this is also something I need to show you, the famous Janssens map, Belgi, Novi Anglia, Novae et Partis Virginae, Novissima delineatio from 1650, 1651. The Janssen map is actually the model for the mapping of the Northeast region for the next 100 years. It is the first map to show the Swedish settlement in New Jersey on the Delaware. You see it predates the Herman map. And it is believed that all the Indian tribes that were encountered by Europeans at the time are noted on the map. So this is something I need to work on more precisely. On the New Jersey map, you can see that there are elements worthy of analysis. And for example, some toponyms, ethnonyms, and cultural features. Here you see with the prevalence of those ethnonyms that the Lenape populated the whole area still. And of course, you have different spelling in English, Dutch, and Swedish, but we recognize the numerous tribes we have seen on the previous maps, the Coensig, the Naraticans. Naratican means raccoon, who depended greatly on the animals dwelling in streams and thus on this natural resource. The Armomex or Armewamis or Armewamsi, the Aquavachukes, the Motovancans, the Sahicans, and the Tapans from Tupane, meaning cold water. So we also see the manner of Indian fortification, townhouses, and dwelling places, modus muniendi, which occupies a very large section of the map. However, this feature is taken from the Janssen map, where they represent the Mahican villages and fortifications. So here they are used to illustrate Lenape settlement, but if the Lenape used longhouses when they're regrouped, notably in the winter months, there are no reports of fortifications with palisades in such an arrangement, or maybe I'm wrong, but so you see how it was used from one map to the other and not always accurately. The use of canoes is depicted in great detail here, again inspired from earlier representations, notably the Herman map and the Janssen map. In 1677, so 7 years after the Herman's map, it seems that Shylock or Shylock Bay, South Jersey, and Lenape was perhaps not only, but still mostly populated by natives. And obviously, these populations were not contained on the eastern side. They permanently traveled and crossed the river to trade, whether the Minkas, Susquehanna, who came from the west, the Mantus, who dwelled on the east bank of the Delaware, for example, crossed the river to the west to sell the corn they had grown in surplus to their Indian neighbors or to Europeans, for example. All these instances demonstrate the intense presence of indigenous populations in the Delaware Valley and the varied ways they use the land, contradicting the argument along which indigenous people did not know how to use the land, the argument that was used to justify the domicilium vacuum theory to appropriate land that was considered unused, unimproved. William Penn did not resort to the domicilium vacuum theory. However, this 1681 promotional map of Pennsylvania, which he commended, is an excellent example of erasure of the indigenous entities from the cartographic representation and stresses the role of maps as public statements intended to impact their viewers' understanding. Penn knew very well who was populating the area. He had surveyors at hand who could have given him reports on more precise reports on the West Bank. But apart from a few, a number of European settlements actually along the Delaware River in the east and the Susquehanna River in the west, the interior, except a few scattered trees, is depicted as completely empty, a sort of terra nullius on which Penn projected his ambitious vision. The huge swath of land translate the potential for plantation for his province, literally inviting settlement. It is on this blank canvas that Penn would impose his famous grid, visible in a 1683 portraiture of Philadelphia that you saw presented by surveyor Jim Shumper. The grid that would allow to implement his settlement design at a large scale, as shown on the 1687 map, also by Thomas Home, that will present the improved part of Pennsylvania. And so this is how I wanted to conclude this presentation. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Agnes. Still there?
Yeah.
There you are. Okay. Hi. Hi. We can turn the lights on. Yeah, please. Are there any questions? Let me give you the mic, Joe. Oh.
What were the Europeans giving the Indians? It seemed like the Indians had everything that they wanted, but what were they getting back from Europeans?
Well, they were trading goods, and well, soon enough, those goods imported by Europeans, they would start to become dependent on them, and this changed their material culture in an important way. So there were a lot of goods that that were useful in their everyday life, and so kettles, knives, beads, you know, there were
Maybe
a
I'll
lot
help
of,
you. I kind of think it was probably mostly gunpowder. They were probably giving the Indians gunpowder, bullets, knives,
oh yeah, that too,
hatchets, wood cutting tools, and they were probably scalping the Indians for all their furs. They had the Indians, I think, doing all the trapping and furring and all the hard labor, and they were buying all the pelts. And that's just, I think. I'm not the expert.
yeah, I mean, this was the objective in the first place. That was to control this fur trade. And I didn't give any numbers of the exports of the furs, but it was, when you see the numbers of furs that were exported to Europe, is just like, it's dizzying, really. And when the beaver fur became less fashionable, then that also changed trading relations with these populations. So I'm not sure I'm answering the question.
All right. Well, one more question. Do you have any opinion on they used to give the Indians lots of alcohol too. It kind of led to the demise of it. Besides smallpox, they gave them alcohol. Do you have any opinion on that?
Yeah, well, my opinion is like, well, but Penn forbade the sale of alcohol to indigenous people, and this was one of the conditions, right, from the beginning. And this is also why, well, Penn was able to profit from the rather harmonious relations that were established between the Swedes and the Lenape in the region. And so forbidding the sale of alcohol was part of the success of their relation.
I have a question about the Lenape. You mentioned that they basically, their territory ran from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware. But where would the center of their civilization have been? And what would you estimate the numbers were of their population at that time?
So it's difficult to have population estimates because the populations had already been decimated by disease brought by the Europeans. So you had upriver. So because the Unami, Lenape Unami mean Lenape from down the river. So the people who were down the Delaware River, and you had the Munsee upriver, who were the people populating more the region corresponding to New York. And well, you see the reports by Lindestrom on the Schuylkill. He mentioned 6 towns. He mentioned 4 big communities that had each several hundred people, some a little more, some a little less. But if you multiply all this, you know, along the Delaware and then all the way up to New York, it's quite a number of people. But I don't want to. I haven't checked the numbers. I wouldn't want to give you information that is not accurate.
I have a question online.
Okay, we have questions in the chat, so please type it in and I will get to it. We have 4 in a row. Thank you very much. Excellent presentation, informative. So I'll skip to the first substantive question. Is there any evidence or accounts that the Lenape ever actually saw maps of the area? Since they did not the written culture themselves, looking at a map of land they knew intimately must have been foreign to them.
It's a very interesting question. Thank you, and thank you for the kind words. They're appreciated. So yeah, I also work actually on maps by indigenous people, and so there are very few accounts, especially with Lenape people, of Lenape persons looking at European maps. There are later accounts, more in the 18th century, and I'm thinking of accounts from the Southeast, for example, where indigenous people were asked to contribute their knowledge, their geographical knowledge to make maps. There is a map of the Susquehanna River dated 1683 that was made with indigenous contributors. And you see that their way of representing the geographies is different, but it was you know, that maps were about European maps at the time were about accuracy and precision and latitude and longitude, and but the European officials that were involved in this map making wondered at the exactness of well, the maps that the indigenous people drew, and the way they were able to have the geography of huge extents of territory without any measuring instruments or any kind of device that the European people had at their disposal. So this is another whole conversation. It's a very interesting aspect of maps as well. The way they were, their spatial epistemologies and their geographical knowledge was huge. But since, well, the kind of maps that indigenous people could draw, they were not meant to be permanent. They would draw, for example, in the sand, or using twigs, or, you know, to explain something to someone, but it was not meant to stay. Only petroglyphs are considered as directions that were meant to be permanent. And yeah, I need to stop.
Thank you.
Here. Thank you.
This is probably the burning question, which is, how did a lady in France get so interested in the Delaware River Valley?
Yeah, well, you know, I lived in Philadelphia for 4 years, and this is when I already worked on the region before living there, but living there was just like, I needed to understand, you know, how it was created, how Pennsylvania was came to be, and then of course, you know, it's a beautiful region. I really love it. It's my second home, and I just, you know, I can't have enough of information and history about this wonderful region and the wonderful people who live there.
Very nice. We're happy to have you as an adopted Philadelphian.
Thank you very much.
So Ginny had a question. Did the maps reference or build on the earlier maps? For example, did the 1651 map build on the 1639 map, or were they not aware of each other?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the Dutch, because this was the golden age of Dutch cartography, and so they would know what was around in terms of maps and geographical information. So especially the Dutch, the West India Company actually started a sort of archive for maps. And they asked all the captains that left on exploration and the pilots to bring maps of their exploration and their travels and the voyages. And this is how they started creating this enormous archival material of maps. So Now it depended if the map was manuscript, if it was printed, because of course a printed map would circulate more easily. So it's difficult to say that every map maker had access to every map that was done before, but they usually built on what was made before them. The 1639, or well, don't know exactly the date of the Vingbunds map, must have been known, of course, by the people, the Janssen and the Vischer, who were involved in the map making business in Amsterdam and the Netherlands. So,
Okay, thank you. Another one. I'm going to have to interpret this one a little bit. Tom, if I get it wrong, type it again. The Susquehanna or Mincos and Iroquois put pressure on the Delaware. Did that clear the land and the towns of the Susquehanna of native people?
well, there were movements. Well, so there were wars between the Susquehanna and the Lenape in the 1620s and 1630s. So actually, the Susquehanna pushed the Lenape residing on the west bank of the Delaware to the east bank of the Delaware, but then they moved back. So you had those kinds of movements, and also according to the European settlements, right? So also later, the Lenape relocated to the Susquehanna Valley. So you had movements at any point in time in this or that direction, and it's actually, I'm just beginning to trace all these movements, so I could not tell really accurately where and when this place would have been emptied, or temporarily or permanently.
I guess that's going to be a topic of another presentation for you, Agnes. What year did the Lenape and Swedes get along and not kill each other?
So this is what Jean Sutherland explained really well in her book, that the Swedes had a very egalitarian society. They were Lutherans, and they had a very egalitarian vision of society, which is also the vision of the Lenape. And this corresponded really well in terms of social and political organization, that the people in charge would respect the will of their people and listen to them before they would take a decision. And the Swedish king was actually, well, very busy doing, well, in the 30 Years' War. And this is why he came so late to be interested in the New World. And it's more his daughter, Christina, that was involved. But he was a king that was who respected his people and did not want any people enslaved or in servitude. He wanted common people to have access to opportunities. So it was a very interesting society. And they were respectful of the Lenape when they came. Well, of course, there is numbers, and as you saw, the numbers really are important. The Swedes were not numerous enough to be a threatening presence to the Lenape, and the Lenape, as you saw, also very quickly demonstrated that they were in command. But what the Swedes also did is that they respected their agricultural practices, and they, for common interests, were involved in this trade of corn, notably, and respected their practices, and also with the tobacco plantations. And everybody could find their interest in this trade in this system of trade.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. People have been happy to see your answers, and we do appreciate you getting up at an ungodly hour to be with us. Hopefully,
Well,
you come back to Philadelphia, you can be on our time.
Yeah, it would be wonderful. And thank you so much again for having me. I really, I'm very glad. It's an honor to speak at an historical society in Philadelphia, and so I'm very glad. And I hope I get to meet you in person when I come back.
Thank you, Agnes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay, you can sign off now. Agnes, we're going to have the business meeting after the meeting, which will commence. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Okay, that was interesting. That was the burning question. How did a lady in France get totally interested in? That was very important to get to know. A couple quick things. On November 17th, which is a Sunday, there's going to be a lot of things happening. I guess I should be here, right? A lot of things happening in Holmesburg. No, Home Circle. And probably is better to speak of this, but they're one after the other. So
Yeah, it's November 17th, Sunday, November 17th. We'll be celebrating Thomas Home's 400th birthday. Jim Shopper will be there with a display and do a little more talking or reminding us, refreshing us about Thomas Home. And there'll be lots of politicians telling us all about their interests. So we're looking forward to that. It'll be at the Thomas Home Crispin Cemetery at Home Crispin Park at Convent and Home Avenue, about halfway between Convent and Pennypack's Home Circle.
and I believe that's from 1 to 3.
Yes.
Now, before that, just down the road at the former Lower Dublin Academy, the Albanian community is going to have a ceremony because they are going to have one of those ceremonial names. There apparently, there's a grand Albanian, there's a grand, I don't know, there's a grand Albanian hero, and they're going to have one of those little signs that names that block after this hero. And he has a phenomenal history. He was just out there winning and, kicking ass and taking names, I guess, at a time when that was not something people were necessarily doing. So that should be kind of interesting. So if you come for the one, you'll be there for the other. They basically run one into the other, and they're just down the street from each other. I also would like to ask Bob Palma to come up and introduce. Last meeting, we had the news that we had a really substantial donation of materials that had been trashed, that we didn't have a good archive of, which were copies of the Northeast Times, and there were some other things. So I'm going to ask Bob to please introduce his friend who is the donor.
Thank you. John, come here. Turn around, he's come. I've known John for a couple of years from St. Luke's church around the corner, and he was his father contributed over the years lots of material, and I'll have him explain. He donated to.
Well, these what was it, two or three volumes that really started with my grandfather, George Kilmer, who lived at 1123 Murray Street, was a member of the Lower Dublin Church in Bustleton. My parents were married there. And my dad used to write the Bits About Town, which was a local paper which told about all the people in Bustleton. And when the servicemen were at war, he wrote to them. So they received some of the home news. My grandfather started, and my grandfather passed that on to my father. And these books more or less tell about old Bustleton. Tells about the old churches that were, well, there's churches are still there, but they were what they were in the beginning, the St. Luke's and Bustleton Methodist, and the two Catholic churches. And it mentioned about all the churches. And then it had the other history of Bustleton, trying to think what was in the books, but it talks about the history of old Bustleton, which I remember. I'll be 83 in December, and I remember Bustleton when the trolleys were coming up Bustleton Avenue. Bustleton Avenue didn't go straight through. It stopped at Welsh Road there, and it was the woods after that behind where it makes the bend on Bustleton Avenue, if you're familiar with old Bustleton. And then they cut right through Pennypack. And the trolley used to go down past where it was Irwin Chevrolet at Welsh and where Maternity BVM Church is. And it goes down to the older church at the bottom of the hill. And there was a train trestle that went across. And that used to be our swimming hole down under the old Bustleton Avenue bridge there. So it more or less, he grew up as I guess it was called, he was more or less his father was a dirt farmer, I guess, or a truck farmer. Took his garden, his ground was Grant Avenue to Fulmer Street, from Cowden Street to Evans Street in that area. And that's where they farmed. And they took their food down to Girard Avenue by horse and buggy. And he eventually became there was a DeKalb drugstore right at the Welsh and Bustleton. He met my mother there at the DeKalb drugstore, and he was going to become a doctor, and until his brother died, then he had to raise his, be there to support his sisters. He had 3 sisters. And so he just was part of Bustleton for his entire life. And he just wrote enough about it. And then my brother picked up after my father died and revised some of it. And so I hope you enjoy, if you're from Bustleton, may bring back some memories for you. Like I said, I've been here from 83 years and I've seen a lot of changes. And if you've been here that long, you've seen a lot of changes also. I hope you enjoy them.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And it's invaluable material.
Yeah, yeah.
Once they're gone, they're gone.
That's all right. So thank you very much. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our next meeting will be December the 4th. And Lou, who's up there running this technical stuff, will be down here doing historic photos of Northeast Philadelphia. And we know that his contributions to materials on the Facebook site with all sorts of photos of Northeast Philadelphia have been very, very popular. He does it kind of like a quiz, and then he teases you until he finally decides to tell you where it is that he's actually got a picture of, which it does prolong the interest, I think. But it has been really good. So we're really looking forward to that. So that will be the last meeting for 2024. Can you imagine? And I was thinking as you were talking, it'll be funny. Let's hope that 25 years from now, there will still be people here saying, you know, I have pictures of, you know, the IHOP on Roosevelt Boulevard, and I have pictures of, you know, macaronis and what that was like. And, you know, history is all around us. So if at any point in time you find something in your attic or you find something that your neighbor has, please look at it, because, you know, history, if it gets thrown away, it's gone, you know. So we're always happy to get things that bring back memories of where we are. So thank you very much. And I look forward to seeing you in December. Fred, do you have anything more? On our YouTube channel. Right. But if you see it on the recording or you've been there in Zoom, you are not going to get the desserts. So everybody who's here, make sure you stop on your way out and get some dessert and chat with us. So thank you very much.